It's like 4:30.
The work session for the Annapolis City Council on Thursday, February 29th, 2024 will be called to order at 3 p.m. This time, would you all join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. City Attorney, please present the item on the agenda.
The first item on the agenda is ID 40-24, Annapolis Ahead Comprehensive Plan 2040.
Welcome. Thank you.
Just to introduce our being here first for a moment. I believe so. To my left is Alex Pline, who was the Planning Commission chairman during the bulk of the preparation of this project, and whose signature is on the resolution that conveyed the project to you, the plan to you. And to his left is Robert Waldman, who you know, and who's the current Planning Commission chair. And to the opposite side of the table is Eric Lashinsky, the principal writer on this plan, who convened the bulk of the public involvement activities over the past, I think, 4 years, 3.5, 4 years for the project. And for the record, Chris Jakubiak, Planning and Zoning. We're really happy to be here. We want to move this project forward, but we want to do it at your pace. The plan is in your wheelhouse now. This is the Planning Commission's document, and as required by state law, they prepared it and submitted it to you. But ultimately, you have to officially adopt it to make it official policy. Speaking for myself, I don't want to see this rushed through the process. I think that cheapens the work of the Planning Commission. What they've said in this plan is important, and we need to spend time on it. We do have guidance from the state, regulations from the state, code from the state that says we have 90 days, so we have a relatively narrow window to operate within, but that can be extended if the council judges that it's important to do. But I'd really like to take as much time as necessary to get this document adopted, and please give us enough time to explain how the main policies and goals were arrived at and what the future might be once this plan is implemented. A couple of points. The plan is about keeping what is essential and important in Annapolis. Again, it's a do no harm plan, first of all. The second element is to look out into the future. And that's the part that a planning commission who's appointed, who has the leeway and the time to reflect upon the future, is most equipped to deal with. And so an element of this is what happens in the future? How do we prepare for the future? What things should we be open to as a community? And how do we equip ourselves for future ideas and a future community? How do we set the course for something that's going to be different in 20 years than exists today? And that's the real challenge about understanding a comprehensive plan is the plan is broad. It's not as specific as we often like it. It's not as strategic and directed and fundable as a lot of plans are. It's an aspirational document that seeks to see a future and prepare for it. And yet the plan is relatively specific in some aspects. A lot of the recommendations are spot on and provide direct policy guidance to the city as a whole. So with that, I just turn it over to our group who wants to present. offer comments, but mostly wants to listen to your comments tonight. And hopefully by the time we complete the meeting, we can chart a pathway to get from where we are now to your eventual approval of this plan. Alex, do you want to say something?
Sure. I just wanted to give a couple of opening remarks. First, that it really is our pleasure to convey the plan to you for your review and analysis and hopefully approval. But just, a few things about it. And I assume you've read our recommendation, and I won't sort of rehash that. But just to make a couple of comments, the focus of this plan is, I think, is really about what makes Annapolis Annapolis. It focuses on those things that are unique to Annapolis, and sort of is what made the city what it is over the last 200 years. As Chris mentioned, this is a strategic document. It's a strategic framework. I mean, personally, I really dislike the term plan because it's really a strategic framework of which to guide the city and the legislative branch and the executive branch to decide what the policies are and help guide those policies through the next 10 plus years. As Chris said, while it does have some specific guidance, it's really not meant to really spell out a lot of detailed policy. That's really up to you guys to do. But this will guide you in the directions we think it should go. I realize it is long. It's the main plan's 450 pages, but a lot of that is pictures and illustrative examples and things like that. And I think this really about 150 pages of really solid meat to it, similar to the action plan. I think I recommend if the public's going to read the plan, read the action plan, because it does contain everything that's in the main plan. And if you find you want a little bit more detail, look at that section in the main plan. I think that's sort of the way to kind of get your hands around it. In general, I don't think this plan is anything radical. It doesn't suggest anything radical, rather just incremental change, allowing the city to grow and adapt, to be resilient to both climate change and economic forces as things change. But some of the things that it does focus on, for example, there's significant missing middle housing that exists in many places in the city. And I think many people, those are duplexes and small apartment buildings, those kinds of things in many places in the city that people look very favorably on. And something that this plan does is makes recommendations for strengthening that housing segment, and frankly, to re-legalize it in places, because in many places in the city, that type of housing is not legal to build. The plan emphasizes mixed use so that people conduct their daily business more easily without having to travel long distance, by car or otherwise. And specifically simplifying our segmented mixed use zoning. So we have a lot of zones in the city that are mixed use in the sense that they can contain both residences and some sort of commercial activity, but they're very segmented and by really specific use. And some of the recommendations are to simplify that to allow the city to be a little bit more resilient to economic factors as times change. The city's largely built out in the sense that we don't have a lot of room for horizontal expansion, like a place in the Midwest or something like that, surrounded by agricultural area, for example. So this plan emphasizes growth through infill development, especially, as I mentioned, via mixed use. So people don't have to travel long distances to do the things they need to do. The plan does suggest slight increases in development intensity in places where it's appropriate with adequate infrastructure. Doesn't suggest it everywhere, but there are places that are perhaps underutilized in the city, and there's a lot of discussion about that. There's significant discussion about improving public open space, especially related to water access, which we know is something that's on many, many people's minds. And then lastly, a focus on a tool that's referred to as form-based code to better guide the predictability and visual appearance of changes that we make in the city with respect to new and infill development. We refer to that in the planning world as the built environment, and it's a way to guide development visually based on its form and scale and mass, the things that people react to very viscerally when they see something. It's too big, it's out of scale, it's too small, it's ugly. Form-based code really tries to guide development based on design standards, how buildings face the street, and all that kind of stuff. Because that's what people really see, and that dictates how a place functions. So that's just a sprinkling of things. And again, as I said, I think these are all things that make Annapolis Annapolis, and a lot of that's very unique to Annapolis. And I think this plan does a good job at focusing on the things that we do best. So with that, I'll turn it over to Bob if he has any comments, or Eric.
Well, unlike my usual, I don't have a whole lot to say. I do recognize that Alex has played a great role in the development of this strategic policy, sets of policies, and that I, as the current chairman, it may fall in my lap to continue to develop some of the things that you see that should be developed from out of this plan. It is a matter of large policies, and I think that if we can agree on these larger policies, that I think that the ways forward will become clearer. I think that some of you may already know what some of those ways forward might be, but we need to sort of look at and agree on the larger directions that we can take to sort of shape what's going to come our way in the next 15, 20 years. I'm here mostly to listen to you. You know, what do you like about the policies? What do you not like about the policies? What do you see as ways to go forward to implement those policies? What is the ways that we should go? Should we go by developing small area plans, or should we go by the way of larger rezonings? I think that some of this is in your laps as well. What I have taken from this document is that Annapolis is unfortunately becoming divided into almost two classes, and that there is that missing middle. You can call it workforce housing, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but it's that missing middle of housing which makes for a city in which people can work and live in this city, in which our children can afford housing in this city, in which people who make the city a vibrant place, the artists and the service workers and the government workers, and the young people who make a city a really lively city with a future. And it's that missing middle of housing which to me has seemed to be the main thrust of the plan, and I agree with Alex. Plan is not the right word. It's more of a strategic formulation, policy goals. Another focus that came to me is on expanding access to things. It's not only opening the gates by water access, it's how do you get from place to place? So one of the themes actually is interweaving the transportation and how you get from here to there, as well as water access, park access, collaborating with the school system to turn their school fields into real parks, which is the way people use them these days. So that's a couple of the themes that I've seen. And I would also just finish up by sort of emphasizing and underscoring the potential value that looking at form-based codes might help everybody in the future as we go forward on these things. It would help our residents, our voters, by being able to see what's going to be built and not get so focused on uses, but what does it look like? It would help the people who build new things by giving them flexibilities to potentially put in mixed uses. And it would help us to maintain the visual fabric of the city. So in any case, I'm here to listen. I've said enough. Thank you.
Thank you.
What they said. I don't have much, I don't have anything to add, really. I'm, like, as Bob said, I'm here to listen as well. And only thing I wanted to add is just a reminder that I'm really proud of the public process that we've had leading up to now. And it's been very transparent. And I want to credit my colleague Casey Ortiz for managing our website. If your constituents are still asking where do I find a copy of the comprehensive plan, just tell them AnnapolisAhead2040.com. That's been the website where we've maintained everything for multiple years, and it directs folks to the city's website where they can access the plan. They can access our new action plan, which, again, as Alex mentioned, reading the executive summary in that is I hate to say, is pretty much all you need to know about this plan. And if you want more details, you can go to the full document. But you can also, you can access all the comments that were submitted during the public comment period on this website. And we had about 30% of those comments lead to major plan changes, dramatic changes to this plan that you've probably seen are all in bright pink in the current draft. So you can see how we addressed a lot of those comments. So that's all I really wanted to add for the public's benefit mostly. Thanks.
So just straight to questions or presentation, anything like that, or just here to listen and just,
right. No formal presentation. Really just want to make sure we can address any comments, concerns, et cetera.
And I would like to say for the public, we haven't arrived at the final plan yet. This is part of the process. This is probably the most important part of the process, where the councillors weigh in on their constituents' priorities and their ward's priorities. We've got a lot of talent on the council here that, no one knows their wards like the people in this city, and I feel like we've all taken this city in a good direction, and this is part of the journey. So, this is a chance to set the right course for the next 10 or 20 years. So thank you for the work that you've put in. I know, Alderman Savage, I probably will go to you first, because I know you were trying to, or not, or... we're all still on the Netherlands high here. So while Rob is still high, he had something, but I can hold off on that if you want. Yeah. Did anybody else? Okay, Alderman Tierney.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question to sort of set to sort of amend to your presentation. One comment that I receive a lot is how did it get so big? How did it develop? And it was, I don't know, over just 100-something pages, and then it expanded. What was that process that did that? Is that a viable question?
It's a totally viable question.
Okay.
I think by and large, a lot of comp plans are in this range of pages. We don't need to compare, but it's a sort of damned if you do, damned if you don't situation where we have a lot of goals and recommended actions here. People want to know where they come from. What is the basis for those goals and action? What is the existing condition in our city today that leads us to those goals and actions? And so we could have a much thinner plan and not provide that background, and then we get tons of questions about where did this stuff come from, or we could give folks all of that background so they can read section as it pertains to their concerns and maybe not read anything else. But that's pretty much where it comes from. And the action plan, which is much thinner, about 100 pages, and that came directly from community comments that we need something that we can kind of get into much more easily, and so that was the idea there.
And so who wrote it?
We had a few consultants in the beginning stages that helped with some of those chapters, and then I started about a year into the process, so I inherited that team. I inherited a citizens committee that I would say was not representative of the city, unfortunately so. I mean, bear in mind, I started during COVID. Former Director Nash was running 2 jobs at the time. I inherited this committee that didn't represent the city. And I was in a situation where I had to figure out, is this committee something that we should continue to work with? Should we augment it a year into the process or do something else? And at that time, I decided the best thing to do was to be much more deliberate about going to boards and commissions, civic organizations, HOAs, community, and that's the way we've done the process so far. So a lot of the writing has been done internally and through consultants with a lot of feedback by members of the community in different capacities. And that's really how it went.
Thank you. Thank you for indulging my questions.
Sure.
That's all.
And if I could just add to one aspect to answer your question, the state's guidance and its statutes have broadened too. There was a time a comprehensive plan could be a lightweight document, say big things, but it could be small. But in 2006, laws were passed to require a municipal growth element. And since then, the guidance has gotten far more complex. What you have to include in the plan has gotten more complex. A water resources element, and then most recently be required to have a housing element and a fair housing assessment. All these things are required to be in the plan. Of course, they could be taken out and put in a separate document, but it's still part of the plan. We've just chosen to make the analysis part of the entire document, so it reads as a whole document.
So for the I'm sorry.
But I was saying,
I was going to say, for the public's knowledge, that is then the state expects an update every 5 years?
it's every 10 years.
Every 10 years,
Yeah.
okay. Following this format.
Yes.
New format.
Yes, right.
Have required elements that have to be included.
I can assure you statewide, comprehensive plans have gotten far more complex and lengthy across the board, and it's because of the state guidance to municipalities in Maryland, counties too.
That's good. I think the public really needed to hear that, so thank you very much.
Alderman Pendle Charleston.
Thank you, Mr.
Alderman
Mayor.
Shadowmeyer.
I'm not going to regurgitate what I wrote, but I still stick by what I wrote. I read the whole 411 pages. And what stood out to me, and I'll say it again, are small area plans. It's something that the county already does, regional plans. I spoke with Mr. Malinoff, our city manager. He indicated that this was something that Annapolis had done before. So it's not new. In my ward, as we all did, took Mr. Jakubiak, our director, on a tour. It was 3 hours. He went on every street. And he was pleasantly surprised that we do have in Ward 3, I can only speak for Ward 3, the missing middle. No doubt about it. And I think when each council person can look at their ward and see what they can do within their own ward, because what works for one ward is not going to work for another, that to me, that's the best way of looking at this whole plan, because every ward is different. And if you look at the historical realm of how the city came about, every place you go, you run into water. So you're dictated by the water in many ways as to what you can really do. And so in fact, this sidebar, I was looking at the Michigan results and looking at their state. And their state counties are little boxes. They're very neat little squares. But when you look at Maryland, because of the water and how it dictates everything, the counties don't run like that. But anyway, I just wanted to make that perfectly clear. The other thing is, being a public safety chair, I noticed in the plan that there were only 22 references to public safety. And we all know if people don't feel safe, it's not a good quality of life. So I was not too pleased with that. Also, there are only 2 references to seniors. One is how they drive, and I can't remember what the other one was. I thought, as a senior myself, I thought that was disrespectful of the seniors to not include them in the plan as well. Regarding the statement about the missing middle, and we want people to be able to live where they work. And I think we all can agree that in Annapolis, there are a lot of professional positions. And if you don't have or didn't have the educational background, you may not be able to find or be qualified for a position within the city. So we have a dysfunction between the history of the educational system in Anne Arundel County, which is not good, it's pretty storied and sorted. And then you look at housing and you look at workforce, and you cannot, at this point in time, try to accomplish having people live where they work. Many of us have our own personal stories, including myself, but I couldn't find a professional position here in the city, so I had to go to Baltimore. And so I can't ride a bike, or I couldn't ride a bike to Baltimore. So there's some things when you look at the historical context of how this city came about, how it has evolved, looking at the school system, the housing, the workforce, there's some things, at least at this point, you just can't do. Now, that doesn't mean we can't look toward the future, like you said at first, but we have to be realistic as well. Now, about the form-based codes, Director Jakubiak and Mr. Lachinsky and I have talked about that. That word code, at least historically, in African-American communities, is not a good word at all. The black codes, and some of you, I think, right after Reconstruction, that was a term that was extraordinarily negative. So any kind of thing that you come up with and you're using the word code, and I'm not talking about the city code, that's a whole nother ballgame. But when you're talking about zoning and housing and you're using form-based codes, that sends up a negative connotation. So I think that's all I sort of kind of had beyond what I read. And as I told Mr. Lashinsky, I had to read beyond the executive summary in order to get the full context. But thank you all for your hard work, and I know my colleagues have questions and comments and statements as well. But thank you so much.
Can I just make a couple of comments? With respect to the way that the county has done their recent planning efforts, so they did their general development plan, essentially their version of their comprehensive plan, the Plan 2040. And so now they're in the process of doing their regional plans, and those are, so again, their general development plan is a very big picture strategic plan. And their regional plans are still strategic in nature, but they focus on what's unique about that particular area. So, for example, so a lot of talk about Ridgely Avenue, that area leading up to North Bestgate. And so that's an example of an area that, that has much more implementation sort of ideas. And I don't see what we're doing here as being unlike that. So first we put this larger big picture thing in place, and then we have done other small area plans. They haven't been quite in that phasing. For example, like as one of the appendices here, there was a plan for the business area of West Annapolis as an example. Probably should have done that after, but just because of the way things worked out, that ended up happening first. But I don't see that being, that idea, as you mentioned, being incongruous with the path we're down now. So that
I've been to several of those regional plan meetings, and I've heard the public comments. And I'll tell you this. I didn't know what I was doing when I first started this, but I was basically using a template for small area plans where Ward 3 has a 10-point protocol that we use. They first go to planning and zoning. Planning and zoning says, have you talked to the alderwoman? They come to me. We have a meeting, me and one of the representatives from the Greater Parole Community Association. We talk to them. We find out from the developer and the representative exactly what they're looking for. After that, we debrief, the representative and I. The representative writes me a white paper. The representative takes it back to the executive leadership team for the Greater Parole Community Association. They discuss it. Then they have a community meeting. Then they have a meeting with the representative and developer. Then they have a community meeting. And then the community determines what goes and what doesn't. I'm not involved in this side part of it, which is because of Ward 3 and how it's situated in historical contents. The Greater Parole Community Association will ask the developer and the representative, what community outreach are you going to do in our community? What are you bringing to our community? And so that's something we developed when I first got on the council. I didn't realize that that's something that really, I think any ward can really utilize to their specific ward. It doesn't have to be dictated that way. But that way you get community input, you find out what fits in that particular space. We had one situation where the developer wanted to put in 220 rental units. And the the community said, oh no. We had one, same thing. We end up having 48 workforce housing, and the other one was, when I was coming into office, was I think 46 or something, kind of high-end development. So the community dictated what it could handle. And because I tell all developers, when you go home to your nice warm beds and your comfy communities, I'm the one that gets the 12 o'clock midnight phone call and the 11 o'clock knock on the door, Rhonda, fix this. And so we all have to take ownership and realize that we all have to live with whatever is decided. And that, to me, is huge. And we all know our wards, as the mayor indicated, better than anyone else. And to me, we are the policymakers, or whatever we want to call ourselves, when it comes to something as comprehensive and something as extraordinarily important as this is. This is huge, and we're talking about 2040. So that's kind of my nickel's work.
And I just want to make one general comment about the addressing of public safety in this document. Again, this is a very big picture document. Public safety, in my mind, is a very tactical kind of thing. That's very implementation specific. And the plan, the document does talk about the need for public safety, but how you implement that public safety, frankly, is we have other policy tools and governance tools to actually do that implementation. Like, probably the biggest one is adequate public facilities, which is essentially, it's talked about here, and that's how do we implement public safety that go along with these big picture policy that we might put in place. And then, of course, the capital and operating budgets that determine how big can our police force be? How do we staff our fire department? What kind of capital investments do we need to make? Frankly, those don't belong in this plan, because this is really a big picture thing. So I don't mean to say that those are not extremely important, because they are, because the city can't function without them. But there are just other policy tools and other implementation tools where those details come out. And so that's why you don't see a lot of it.
And what you just said probably should have been in the plan. That kind of sets the stage and lets people know that you didn't ignore it.
Yeah.
We're looking at it, but this is how we see it.
It can definitely be in the plan. I just want to be clear about that. I mean, there is room for improvement, as Director Jakubiak said. I mean, this is not a finished plan. And the part about public safety that I got excited about, I mean, we interviewed every department in the city to put the plan together. And we wanted to highlight the things that Annapolis Police is doing right, that they're innovating all the time and trying to come up with new strategies and new programs. We wanted to highlight those things. And from a planning perspective, we also wanted to acknowledge that public safety today is viewed much more holistically than it ever has been. And the tools that we have go beyond conventional policing. You know, we know where violence is happening in the city. We know we can target particular places with other investments, right? And so that was kind of no other comprehensive plan has approached it that way. It's just, if you look at past comprehensive plans, it's been very succinct. And we wanted to get beyond that, but we can certainly add to it. I read I highlighted your response, and you know, I was happy to see a lot of complimentary things in there. The the point about seniors in the city, we heard that from a lot of people who responded to the plan, and we actually added. We highlighted the over 65 population. That's how the census refers to the senior population. We highlighted statistics about, you know, who are seniors in the city today, what are their needs. And I found a quote from AARP that I really like that's in here that says, if you build a community great for an older adult, you build a community great for everyone. And that's, I mean, I thought that said it pretty well.
And based on what you're saying, Mr. Lashinsky, you can add that as an appendices, the public safety and the senior. But anyway, thank you all so much again.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alderman Chenema.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two questions. One was on the environmental sustainability portion. Something that was recommended was to create an urban forest master plan that includes updates to city street tree standards. I'm really excited about that. I'm a big believer that street trees boost a community in a multiple of ways. One of the best ways being makes it infinitely friendlier for walking. I don't know the last time anyone took a walk down Upper West or Forest Drive in the middle of the summer, but it's terrible because it's hot, it's unprotected, and it's just one of the worst things. Did the comprehensive plan get into, or was there any like potential starting points or recommendations on a urban forest master plan, or is that just something we would have to do on our time after the adaptation of this?
Well, the plan includes quite a bit of analysis of where we are today with our urban tree canopy. It does not, makes a lot of recommendations on policy, and we've had a lot of conversation with the Environmental Matters Committee about this. There's, in fact, a lot of the recommendations are probably going to be put in motion, you know, even before this is adopted, but we really want to, the scope of what that urban forest master plan has not been fully resolved. So that would be after this is adopted. And we identified some precedents. They're not mentioned in the plan, but just we have an idea of some places that have done that well and that we could kind of look to. Cambridge, Massachusetts is one of those. So
I think that's a really great recommendation for you guys' part, because that has just a multitude of benefits for not just expanding like attractiveness of an area, but just making it more pleasant to be in. I noticed on Main Street, actually, we have a significant lack of trees during that last summer's heat wave, and it was not a pleasant place to be on. And it's downtown Annapolis. It should be a great place for everyone to be, regardless of weather. The other portion I want to discuss is on our housing portion. I know that sounds like a surprise question coming from me, but you said on page 138 that we were in violation of affirmatively furthering fair housing, the AFFH rule. What are consequences of us not being in favor of that beyond the morality of us not trying to create a housing stock where people of all types can afford to live? Are there any consequences from the feds that might come down from that? Any potential cutting for grants put in by the new administration?
I would have to talk with my colleague Teresa Wellman about that. I'm not sure about the specifics of besides, it being a blemish on our city and just not really furthering our goals. But yeah, I don't know specifically.
I shouldn't have done the lawyer thing. What the consequences of that is there's going to be a lot of significant cutting in grants if the feds choose to smack the ruler on us, including for transportation costs. The feds are not aggressively going after cities yet, but with the updates coming from the current administration, they have had some slaps on other people, and that is a risk for us if we continue down this current zoning code. So I do appreciate this leaning into things such as form-based code, which can create more types of choices for families while maintaining the overall look of communities.
I would add, though, that Director Jakubiak mentioned these requirements that come from the state Department of Planning for how we conduct the comprehensive plan process, and we had to submit the draft to the state agencies, and we did get lots of comments about the housing. They were very, very specific about how they wanted us to be explicitly clear how we were going to be compliant with the Fair Housing Act standards. So they take it very seriously.
If I can do one more thing, Mr. Mayor, to discuss the Vision Zero portion, page 184 of the plan. Vision Zero is a wishful thought, I think, unless it comes with actual changes in design recommendations. Was there a lot of conversation on the engineering portion of this, discussing like what possible recommendations would be for changing street design in order to actually achieve Vision Zero and not have it as just a well wish?
Well, I represented the city on the county did a Vision Zero action plan recently that's mentioned here in the comprehensive plan. So we would be looking to some of the recommendations they make, but it absolutely does need to include a pretty expansive look at how our street design can work better. That design is sort of one of the key components of having fewer to no traffic deaths.
And is asking for like, what are some of the recommendations that just outside the scope of what the comprehensive plan does? I'm getting some nods. So yeah. All right. Thank you very much.
Alderman Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So first of all, I just want to start with a couple questions for whoever wants to answer. So the first one would be, what are you looking for from us at this point in the process? What are you looking for from us at this point in the process?
An approval? Is that a trick question? I'm kidding.
I guess short of that, concrete recommendations for how we can improve this plan. I think that's the.
Okay.
And I would add, for you to begin thinking about how do you want to see this implemented? I mean, there have been a couple of ideas. Something that sounds nice, a small area plan. Well, quite what does that mean? A sector study, which is not quite, it might be a little bit different than a
Bob, if you could just speak into the microphone, please.
Oh, I'm
so I
sorry.
can record this. Thank you.
So is to begin thinking about, like, what kind of direction do you want to give us? You know, where do you want to see the planning go? Do you want to see it go into real small areas? Do you want to see it go into specific sectors, you know, that we identify as being worthy of really looking at and experimenting with, perhaps? How large, how small is an area plan? You know, and I think that what Ms. Pindell-Charles says is that wards are different, neighborhoods within wards are different. That's the kind of thing I think that it may not show up in here, but I think that we need to get some direction so that when the final product comes out, it's something that, you know, you've initiated and that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and I
So
heard-
concrete suggestions and long-term kind of process implementation, I don't know, whatever words, you know.
I heard you earlier, you said some policy clarification discussion that you want us to have that as
Here
well.
today? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, in general, it's also to know whether there, in addition to concrete feedback, whether there are any really big picture things that are going to be showstoppers, or,
Yeah.
you know, are we just dithering around the edges, or, you know, it would be nice to know sort of where you're headed with your feedback.
So, because we're not going to, I don't think we'll necessarily be able to get to all our feedback today, at least, especially personally for me and probably this guy here, but you could take up the whole 2 hours. But, you know, that'll help me figure out what I need to go over today, summarize today, what I need to get to you at a later date. But I will say, you know, I put a lot of time into reviewing this beforehand over the past few years, really, you know, because I think Mr. Lashinsky's been to the Environmental Matters Committee probably at least 4 times over the past 3 years or so, talking about this plan, and the Transportation Committee and a number of others a number of times. And so what I did send, and I compared, you know, I sent the document I sent to staff with all of my comments, notes. And I don't expect, you know, complete adherence to that, obviously, but when I compared it, probably about 85% were actually acknowledged and kind of changes made, right? And I admit to some frustration with that, because I feel like I'll be sending you the same thing I sent essentially a number of months back. So I want to make sure I'm doing it right this time. How to get some, and, you know, again, some of these are policy discussions. I don't expect staff to say, oh, okay, Alderman Savage said this, let's change the policy. But some of them were just adding additional items, adjusting the wording, because where I'm coming from, you know, criticism might be a strong word, but it could certainly be taken as that. But my goal is to get to a document that is going to be usable by, from my perspective, I'm a policymaker, but also be easily interpreted by the public, right? And that's where that's why I'm trying, as you'll see, trying to wrestle with a number of the language in some of the goals, the structure of the plan, is to figure out how can we make this a document that's going to be of most use as, 1, policy document, but 2, land use document. Because I think, and I'll get into this, because I have policy concerns, comments, agreements. I also have big picture structural issues. And I feel like this document really focuses a lot on policy, but not necessarily on specific land use changes and recommendations. And I'll show some comparisons later, because I looked, you know, one of the first cities I usually go to for comparison is Rockville, because it's kind of one of the more comparable cities. It's a long plan too. You know, when Ross was saying, it's such a long plan, I looked at theirs. So Ross, theirs isn't much shorter, smaller. It's over 400 pages, but it's structured differently, which I'll show. You know, they have the first half of it's policy like ours is, but the second half is all dedicated to small area. They call them basically small area plans. I'll have to look at what they call them. I have in my notes, but where they specifically lay out, it'd be like taking West Annapolis or Bay Ridge area and having specific recommendations just for those. And I'll show you what I mean later. But so those are some of the bigger structural critiques I have. But there is, all that said, a lot I agree with as far as the emphasis on the Greenway Incorporation, the environmental enhancement areas, the water access, and even housing. You know, I started off with a lot of concern about density, because as an environmentalist, I was always very concerned about it, because it usually would mean tree loss, habitat loss, whatever, ecosystem loss. And I think we've gotten a large handle of that in the city. So I don't have as much fear over density because of environmental impacts anymore. My other concern about density was traffic, which is always one of the top concerns we hear from people, right? Whenever a development's proposed, is traffic, especially as the alderman for down the end of Forest Drive and Bay Ridge. But again, I've mentioned this to a number of people individually, but after our trip abroad, it really just clicked with me to say, oh, wow, we have an alternative. The way to address traffic issue is to emphasize the other mobility options, especially cycling. It's the cheapest thing to do. It's the most equitable thing you can do. And I've got an op-ed, which hopefully will be appearing in the Capitol here the next few days, talking about how it's irresponsible to add density without adding mobility, right? Because especially affordable housing, you're going to build affordable housing, and without naming our neighboring jurisdiction here, out in near somebody's ward, they're putting all this dense housing. I don't think any of it's affordable, but just think, if that was all affordable housing getting put in there, how are people going to get around? They're going to get around by car. So they have to pay a car, which is average $50,000. Used, it's $30,000. Pay for the insurance. How's that affordable, right? So the mobility transportation is really key, and I do like that part of the plan. But I think we can do more with that by with some of the small area plan kind of things, and really call out specific improvements. So I want to start with some of the, and I guess I already have started, but go into a bit more detail with some of the goals. Just to give an example, I don't want to go through all of them, but just an example of some of the concerns I have with, again, not the goals themselves, but the wording of them, which is just kind of overly complicated in my mind. Because again, I'm trying to get a document that's easily understandable. If you look at the last comp plan, they do a good job of summarizing, in each section, summarize, here are the overall goals for each section, boom, 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 and then they go into detail. In this plan, it's a little more difficult. So if you look at the municipal growth section, we'll start with MG1. It says, grow in a way that assures public facilities and infrastructure, such as roadways and city services, such as police, are adequately sized and equipped to deliver exceptional service to existing residents, institutions, and businesses. It's a very wordy way to say the goal should just be adequate infrastructure, period. We can flesh it out in the details, the goals, the actual action items. MG2, promote exceptional development within the designated growth area. There's more to that. Within the designated growth area that addresses the city's planning goals and in particular contributes to affordable housing options, the creation of good paying jobs, and the fiscal strength of the city. Again, way too wordy for a goal. Just simplify it. Development that matches the planning goals. Boom, done. MG3, growth in the number of households will prioritize increasing workforce and affordable housing. Simplify that. Increase in workforce and affordable housing. MG4, encourage and incentivize revitalization and redevelopment that best connects residents to retail, services, natural resources, and other amenities. Again, very wordy, complicated, and simplify it to revitalization, connecting residents to amenities. And the reason I'm saying that is just honestly, with a number of these goals, it took me, I had to read them a number of times just to comprehend them. And this is somebody who's immersed in this stuff in both of my jobs and for the past 20 plus years. And I'm thinking, well, if I have that problem, what about a new council member? What about a new staff person? What about the public? And so I think simplification, and again, as an environmental scientist, I went through training, this workshop I had to go to once. It was called What Are Words That Work? How do you simplify science to a way that average person is going to understand? And I think we need to take that approach with this and think about how can we really better simplify things. Because, another example in the environmental section, we have a lot of goals. ES1, practice a comprehensive and equitable approach to resilience that is relevant to all residents. I think that should really just be simplified to successful adaptation to negative impacts of climate change. And that I do have a policy concern with how that's written, which I can just touch on in that, I think when we look at resilience and preparing for climate change, we need to focus on the most vulnerable areas, not necessarily do the projects that are most relevant to people. Like, we have to focus on protecting ourselves, which means targeting those most vulnerable areas. ES2, expand cities' tree canopy, particularly within heat islands and along riparian corridors. And simplify that. Tree canopy expansion. That's all you need to say. So the other thing I want to touch on regarding the goals, if my laptop cooperates, is the water section, just towards the end of the document. Here it is, yeah, water resources. Because I think there's a lot of potential, and again, I could seriously take up the whole meeting, but I don't want to do that. I have a number of recommended actions that I think could be added to these goals. I want to just choose one in particular. Let's see. So we have, because one example is there's no mention, a number of these goals, and in particular, sorry, my notes are all over the place. So water resources goal WR5, it says manage cities' wastewater infrastructure proactively to mitigate instances of failure, backups, and overflow. And the performance measures complete baseline inspection of all city sewers per these standards. Performance measure 2, identified sewer replacement or relining projects. A lot of this is like, it comes across as like public works jargon. This is coming from somebody working in public works. It's not, it's almost like their wish list of things that they want done, as opposed to, I don't know, something more.
Bob, where was this? I'm sorry, I lost you.
Page 360. That's okay. So, like, as an example, one of the things in here I think we could add as a performance standard would be, and this is under the wastewater section, is we've had a couple of sewage spills. So let's have a performance standard regarding spills that have happened in the city, detection time, response time, reducing the number of such events. Those, I think that'd be helpful to add as, or we could have a performance measure instead of this, for measure number 2, instead of the kind of public works jargon, just have linear feet of old sewer pipe replaced. That'd be something I think the public can easily understand. That's just, again, as an example. Going back a few pages to 356, that's the water resources WR1. Reinforce an ethic of proactive watershed stewardship through all sectors of the city, including residents, businesses, and institutions. That goal, it's confusing to me. We don't need to say including in that. I'm not clear on what the purpose is of reinforcing an ethic of stewardship. I think the answer to that question should probably be the goal. You mentioned stakeholders, but what do you want the stakeholders to do? I think there could be a lot of work, and we got into some of this in committee. I think we ran out of time to really go through some of the water sections. And you'll see, again, I think this is one of the, we can certainly go into detail on this in the Environmental Matters Committee. I think I'll just leave that part there. you could also look at some of the, page 358 regarding some of the action items. And this is under the watershed restoration, practice comprehensive approach toward watershed restoration that reinforces the both ecological and cultural values of Annapolis waterways. Again, I think that's a bit too wordy. And these are all good actions, but they're all, as far as the recommended actions, but they're all really relatively minor. I mean, the big hitters as far as improving water quality are increasing green space, increasing stormwater management, reducing impervious surface, those kind of things. Converting our outfalls to step pool stormwater conveyance or regenerative stormwater systems like the county's done. So I think there's a lot of attention that needs to get brought to the environmental sections. I'm happy to work with you on this either separately or as a part of the committee. So some of the other structural issues, I just want to do a comparison. I don't know if the video studio could bring up one of the pictures that I sent you. So this is kind of hard to see, but that's the Rockville plan, just again as comparison. You'll see that on the left is all the goals, policies, the page 1 through 231. On the right are all the planning areas, which is kind of like the small area plans. And so can you go to the next one? See all those, this is one of the first area listed on the those planning areas. And they have, what they have, like 17 or so listed. So the whole city was broken up in these different areas. The Rockville Town Center, and they go in for each community, describe the characteristics. And go to the next picture, please. Go into the planning history. Next page. And then they have a picture of like a drawn in, zoomed in picture of all the different land use, and they have the little numbers. You'll see P7, P9, P8, P4, whatever, going all down through the list. Next page. And then so they dive into all the areas they've labeled. So focus area recommendations. So they really delve into the specific areas and say, look, here's a land use policy map, talk about the changes they have on the map, the specific zoning recommendations, urban design recommendations for each area. The next page. And then they go even further into key issues for that sub-community. Next page. Recommended city projects, so they tie it in with the CIP, which I think is good for people to conceptualize. If the public were to go, what's happening in Parole, they can look up Parole and see all these projects that are going to be impacting Parole. And these, again, I don't know, I didn't take a close enough look to see if these are actively in the CIP or just ones they are planning, recommending. Next page. Next page. And then they break down in the communities different headings. So they have recreation park recommendations, transportation, Vision Zero, like so specific. Like I love the Vision Zero, safe routes to school, but let's tie it all together because we have big maps of the whole city, but this goes in your community level. What specifically can we do for Vision Zero in each of these communities? For parking, whole parking section too. Next page. So I think that's it for that. But so I kind of like that idea. That to me is more of the land use part of it as opposed to just the policy. And I know it's probably a lot to have to add that to this kind of document at this point, but that to me kind of had a lot of value. It really ties things together because then I could see, oh, here are the bikes, the cycling improvements that we're going to be identifying for Ward 7 or whatever, the community by community. So, yeah, I think that's basically it. I mean, they do, that's just an example of kind of their goals and how they're simply worded. Plan for parks, enrich civic and cultural life. Easy to understand. So that's my basic gist is I I see these larger improvements that I don't know what to do with them. I'm trying to suggest, I do some specific policy improvements. I'll save my policy discussions for later, but I wanted to just touch on those kind of bigger picture questions.
Thank you. Alderman Gay?
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me well?
Yep, question.
I appreciate that. I may have to jump a bill that I am working on, just got called up in another committee. I have quick questions. I seen a page on minorities in the city of Annapolis. There was an entire page dedicated to the Hispanic population. I did not see the same for the African American community, or for that matter, the Asian community, which would be the top 3 minority communities in the city.
Alderman, what table are you referring to? Because we do in the demographic chapter, we have a pretty detailed accounting of current racial breakdown in the city, but we don't project out that into the future. So I don't know if that's what you're.
I'm not asking for projections. I'm asking for current breakdown. And there was a pretty detailed page. I'm scrolling back up now, and I'm on page 109. Give me a second.
Yeah, I mean, page 46, we have charts that show the race and ethnicity distribution in 2021, and then since the last census, and that those do have Black / African American and Asian and Hispanic Latino.
Well, this was an entire page dedicated to, and it was actually very detailed.
So you might be referring, we added content about the 2 fastest growing demographic groups on page 48 and 49, and one is the 65 and older population, and one is the Hispanic / Latino population. Is that what you're referring to? It was
that may be
2 full pages, and the emphasis there was frankly on highlighting these 2 groups that are growing faster than any other demographic group in the city. And so that's we could certainly add information about the other demographic groups. That wouldn't be a problem, but that we got comments, particularly for the 65 and older. We had a lot of comments during the comment period to address that group specifically. So
yeah, one of the comments that you made, which I had a question and you alluded to, it's written in the document as well I've seen, is that you're building a town for older people and the rest of the town will be safe, or the rest of the town will fall in line, something along those lines. Expand on that if you don't mind.
Yeah, there's a quote when we're talking about the senior population, the quote that came from AARP. If you build a community great for an older adult, you build a community great for everyone. And that just, a lot of the priorities for the group AARP, the advocacy group for senior population, they're aimed at increasing our sidewalk and cycling networks. They're increasing affordable housing. I mean, if you look at their policy platform, it's a lot of the things that people are looking for in Annapolis. And that's the kind of the...
So question then to that and to land use development. Why do you have issues promoting density in housing, non-senior housing, but you don't have problems promoting density in senior housing? For example, there's emphasis on senior facilities, which are worse for the environment. They have 10 times the traffic because you have to take into account emergency vehicles, employees, family visiting, etc. These massive facilities that have, like as I just mentioned, increased traffic, increased density. So how can you promote that, but you struggle to promote affordable housing density?
there's no prioritization of that. There's I mean, if you saw something in the plan that suggested prioritizing assisted living facilities over I mean, I don't know where it is, but we want to encourage diversity of housing types for all incomes, all population. I mean, bar none, that's really the focus of this plan, is aiming to have a diverse population in the city, and we need housing that can support that diverse population racially, economically, special needs. I mean, that's really the emphasis of the plan. We don't discriminate at all.
What is context-sensitive neighborhood serving development? That was mentioned, and I should have wrote down the page. It suggested that, the focus should be on context-sensitive neighborhood serving development. And I just wasn't sure exactly what that meant.
Without knowing exactly where the reference is, I mean, I think we have references to context-sensitive development in a few places, meaning there are existing patterns of development in the city that are established, that people appreciate, that have added character to communities that we want to understand and advance. So we're looking for new development that is consistent with the character of the city, but there's a lot of room there to create different housing types and so forth. So,
with and most of my questions, as you can guess, are related to housing. I have a few other, but just on housing. With the infill suggestions, and I was just going over, by the way, I thought it was fantastic, the suggestion to take some of the existing spaces, convert them, especially along the Forest Drive corridor. But to me, I felt that the suggestions for the existing spaces or facilities, or in some cases vacant, were segregated in themselves. For that example, any current space is being converted back to low income, or being suggested to be converted back to low income housing, when there is housing on the corridor that is not low income housing. Can you speak to that a little bit more? In particular, again, like the Robinwood / seafood area is suggested that be converted to low income housing. And then like the clock tower space, for example, it is not. Shouldn't that be the opposite? Shouldn't we be promoting new cultures and new spaces in the infill projects?
Right. The emphasis almost throughout. So I think what you're referring to in the land use chapter, we identify about a dozen high visibility sites that would be suitable for some kind of infill redevelopment. A lot of these are aging shopping centers, places that we know will transition in near future. We want to be proactive about providing a vision for what they should be. In almost every circumstance, the housing recommendation is for workforce housing, mixed income housing that might be a range from low to moderate income. And I would say the same. I'm trying to find the reference to the clock tower place, but that shouldn't be different than what you were referring to for Robinwood.
Okay, maybe I misread that, but I thought it was suggesting something different. But to the point that you made, and most of it is suggesting the development. I do have a question also on, for example, the suggestion of when we build these the properties, how can planning and zoning, instead of simply tweaking the zoning, for example, in Tyler Avenue is currently R2 and B1 and B2, how can we maximize potential in those areas and places with, where the lots are so large, you want to see more development, but you don't necessarily want to see those families priced out. So can you speak to that a little more?
You want to go?
To a certain extent, the zoning rules that we have in place determine what can and will be built. Specifically, if there's certain incentives that come along with any kind of zoning rules that we have. And, frankly, if it's being a for-profit development, people have to make money. And typically the rules that we have in place often here, the most valuable thing is the land cost. And so if you can only for example, minimum lot sizes, if the land cost is such that with a certain piece of size of land, you pretty much have to build a big house because that's the only thing that's economically viable. So what I would say is that the rules that our that our zoning code creates determine what can be built there. And so I would encourage, as we go, as you look at this plan and start to implement it, you think about the zoning rules that you put in place that might incentivize, for example, the building of single-family houses that are 900 square feet. That's like the size of a small Cape Cod kind of, or a bungalow. A lot of them exist in the city, but typically are on very large lots because 75 or 100 years ago, the land wasn't that expensive. But it's very expensive now, so that if you want to have things that are less money, they have to necessarily be smaller. But often our rules don't allow that. So you have to think about that as you go forward and implement any of the zoning changes that are recommended here, as to how to incentivize things that are not as expensive. One way to do that is something like the MPDU program, where you build expensive stuff and then you subsidize some of it. That's one tool in the toolbox. Things like workforce housing with low-income tax credits, like the Willows, that's another tool. A market-based approach might be allow smaller lot sizes where you can build smaller houses and more of them so that they're naturally cheaper. These are all sort of tools that we can use. And there's no right answer. I think the right answer is all of the above. That help?
So, yeah, that does help. And that's what I hope that you're getting at with the Tyler Avenue area in specific. But just to expand on that a little more, and I'll use these two examples and then we can move on. Currently on West Street, you have the vacant gas station that's been vacant for some time. And you also, as you noted in here, you have West Village LLC, which is essentially like the lot next to Lemongrass. When an applicant or when someone proposes development for spaces like that, there's there's room for maximum growth, maximum density. The building next to it is at least 50 feet. So within the existing authority of the Office of Planning and Zoning, what leverage can be given so that outside of a comprehensive plan that may or may not be enacted and may or may not change the zoning code, what can your office do to promote growth and development in examples like that without, here's the caveat, without them being, two townhouses for $685,000 a piece?
Well, we have the plan unit development process, but that's not really a panacea because it's a complicated process. It does allow for flexibility and incentives for density bonuses, that kind of thing, but it's a complicated process that's frankly expensive. Things like the building that we approved next to Lemongrass. Personally, there's 6 apartments in there. Personally, I would have liked to see 8 or 10, but smaller. And by being smaller, they would have been cheaper. But our code doesn't allow it.
Here's a couple of other answers to that, couple details. If you build housing along a transit way, then there doesn't need to be as much parking. Okay? So therefore, you can encourage somebody to build something more dense, so to speak, at Tyler Avenue and Forest Drive because it's along a transit way. So a family may not have two cars, they may only have one car, but in each case, you need to look at the context sensitive and realize that there's parking down Tyler Avenue so that you can minimize the parking in your new development even more. Now, here's a third example, okay? Over in West Annapolis, they built, what, four of those?
Row house.
4 row houses, and they're required, two things. They were required to put in parking, okay, even though there's a fair amount of parking right along the street, and their little parking lot is generally, according to anecdotal evidence, not full all the time. And secondly, they could have gone up another story, but zoning rules didn't allow it. But if we had some idea of being able to visualize in the future what the size of this thing needs to be and how much parking will or will not be required, then the developer can begin to expand and we can see what it is we're going to get. So it's the details which count. You're absolutely right to focus in on something called context sensitive. But in every case, as Ms. Pindell-Charles points out, every neighborhood, ward, they're all different. And that is going to take close attention. But you have to give flexibility and simplification as a major policy goal for these kinds of things to move forward.
And I think, that's what we tried and failed to do with a previous workforce housing bill. I think it's frustrating that it appears what you're telling me is that not even the director himself can create a pathway forward for common sense development. Some people call it smart growth. To me, it just seemed, common sense development. We're a small city. We have to go up and just make the best use of our lands. To wrap it up really quickly, I would love more detail on the transit stuff. I know that we're trying to focus on bicycles and walking paths, etc. But I really, really would like to focus on, interconnecting transit to the county. I know you showed the example of the transit site that they'll have at the mall, but we are still falling so short in our transit goals in the city. I don't know how we will even, match up or pair with something that the city or the county may be doing on a regional level, because we can't seem to provide, fast, efficient transit within the city. Not to knock any of the things that we have going on, like the electric buses, etc. But we have to, figure out that small scale mobility. I was pleased to see that you highlight the need for procurement definitions for minority businesses and trying to figure that out. And so that's all my questions. I appreciate the time.
May I just respond? I really couldn't agree with you more about the emphasis on transit. I think that is a key to the Annapolis that we want to see. And just we can't have the variety of development that we're looking at without having better transit. It can't be the last resort for people to get around, which it is today. I think there's lots of great precedents out there. You probably saw some of them on the trip. So, that I really, and we had a meeting with the Education Commission a few weeks ago that led to some of the changes in this plan. And one of their big requests was simply to run Annapolis Transit to Annapolis High School. And then you can hit all of those other county facilities, the farmer's market, the county offices, the swim center, the park and ride, and it's just a straightforward recommendation. But I think that's kind of one just concrete example of how the transit could work better.
I also think in the future, you're going to see more opportunities for private entrepreneurship on small scale rather than relying on a publicly funded transit system. Shuttle runs that run between Eastport and the Hillsmere Shopping Center and Eastport, along Bay Ridge. Private company, if we allow them and figure out how to regulate them, that they could run a shuttle service up and down. So that once that prized parking space in Eastport is gotten, you don't have to give it up to go get a loaf of bread and a quart of milk. Just that sort of a thing is the thing that this document is looking towards. Let's open it up and let's think about it in new ways.
Exactly, you're spot on, and I did not want to touch the sore subject of Eastport parking, but you're right. Like I am 100% in favor of redeveloping the Eastport Shopping Center and seeing that turned into something marvelous that will generate revenue for our city and be a good example for the city of Annapolis in development. But I am incredibly worried about the traffic. I mean, there's already terrible traffic in the lower half of the peninsula, and so those are all things that we can take into consideration. But I think they can be fixed. And I guess what I'm hearing you say is that these are the ideas you would like us to create the policy. And I'm kind of disappointed because I would have liked to seen the policy and have just moved forward with the idea. So, but I get what you want us to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Alderman Tierney?
Okay. Just to expand on that, it seems like transportation is the elephant in the room, if you will, and you speak of that specifically on page 190. You say, as where do you say it? Being that it's largely built out, that it's fewer tools. It has fewer tools than other places for improving mobility. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but that's a really important given, so it's almost like we punt and say, okay, then we're going to focus on walkability and biking. So in looking at transportation as a whole, yes, I acknowledge the biking and the walking and all that. That's really good stuff. But you got to have the micro transit. I mean, we don't have a grid system. We are at the end of a peninsula. We'll never have the kind of bus routes, right? So the micro transit is the answer, really. So you speak of that, but not that much. I mean, how much emphasis is on that? I know that there's RFPs presently, and we're on it, but. Where should we invest, in capital projects,
Right.
as far as micro-ability, micro-transit?
Well,
Or can we do it all, I guess is my question.
No, just a great point. I think the Magenta shuttle downtown has been a revelation for a lot of people. I mean, It has proved that you have frequent subsidized transit, people use it, and it goes to places where people need to go. I mean, I think it's been well utilized.
Right.
And so I think we highlight that in the public transit section, page 201. And then under electric mobility, that's where we highlight some of these micro mobility tools that have already been tried. Annapolis Go and the small 10-minute trolleys. I think you're right that the size of our city allows for us to work with that scale of transportation, that we can have smaller vehicles, they can be more frequent, they can be on shorter routes. I mean, I think everybody who worked on this plan did not want to write the transit policy, the transit plan for our transportation department, but just provide some ideas that could kind of help them move in the right direction.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, one positive thing, among others, is, we've restricted parking in District 1 and 2, so my concern was Maryland Avenue. Oh my God, what are they going to do? And that cute little electric shuttle has been really beneficial to them, and we have to continue that, to get customers, to their stores. All right, I'm kind of helicopter view here. Alex, you said something interesting. You said, when you were talking, I'm not sure, this is going to be out of context, but I think you were talking about development. We're looking at a good development, which is appropriate with adequate infrastructure. So let's just talk about infrastructure. Annapolis is an aging city. It has aging infrastructure, and I'm not talking about road. I'm talking about like what's underneath. You know, I mean, it's right. So you do a really thorough job of itemizing the opportune sites. You know, on what is one something. You know what I mean? The ones with you go through every site and say this is what is beneficial. When you look at infill. Is the objective there in those infill developments, is it to utilize what's there to the best of your ability as far as any existing infrastructure? Are you introducing new infrastructure? I mean, you don't speak of it in those brief synopsis of each area, right?
Well, with respect to some of the key pieces, specifically sewer and water.
Yeah.
The plan does talk about what capacity we have in the existing systems, and certainly if you build a development in an infill site, the whole city is served by our sewer and water system, so you've already got most of the infrastructure there except what goes from the street to the development. So focusing on that infill is making essentially better use of the large piece of infrastructure we already have, the water system,
right. And
sewer
you don't
system.
say that, but that is what.
That's what's meant in there.
Right. You have one point of connection versus, So, I mean, I think you're optimizing what's there with infill development. People get scared and think it's new development, but you're actually you're making something there better as far as optimizing the land, being
right.
sensitive to what's around it. Yeah. Go ahead.
And to add, you got me thinking, any redevelopment or infill development in the city is going to modernize the stormwater management system.
Right.
So literally every development improves the water quality in area streams and
Right.
and
Thanks
the
to
bay.
my colleagues' code, we put back better stormwater management than what exists.
Right.
Yeah, on these infill areas. Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And that is done by the developer, not at the expense of the public.
Okay. And then last question is, what did you mean, for my colleagues' benefit, when you said public safety is treated more holistically? What does that mean? Is it like intertwined with every initiative?
Yeah. It means that there's pretty broad acknowledgement or understanding that police can't solve every systemic problem that's
Right.
causing crime and violence and
Yeah.
they only have certain tools available to them. And so
Yeah.
we can leverage other tools, whether they're social services. And we have this Office of Community Services, right? That is we profile that initiative in the plan
Yeah.
because it's one of those new tools to get help to people who might need it, who might be, might fall into,
Yeah.
dire circumstances. We have Eastport just got approved. It was a coup to get Eastport to receive funding for the violence interruption program.
Right, yeah.
And that's another tool that didn't exist when the last comp plan, I don't believe so. It's a new strategy for interrupting violence.
Right.
We have, we highlight that idea of a community resource center, which we've established in a couple locations. So it's basically looking at more than just, we definitely acknowledge that we need to add more police. That's been well documented, but there's all these other, we're working on trail projects in places where there's been,
Yeah.
violence, and that kind of eyes on the street activity, that recreation.
Jane Jacobs. You didn't have a chapter on Jane Jacobs. Sorry.
No, we don't, but we could reference that.
And also, the idea, like for the Eastport CNI project, the idea of mixed income, larger, so it's not displacing anybody, but changing the mix of incomes is always good. That it provides this this idea of eyes on the street and not concentrating poverty kind of thing.
It just last comment is that it reminded me of the comments from my residents in the historic district. Why isn't there a chapter on the historic district? Where's the focus on the historic district? It doesn't compare to public safety. I don't, by all means, but your response was it's interwoven, and you do, when you read through the plan, when you talk about grid, street patterns, and you say, like the historic district, it's kind of like, it's not isolated and, like some kind of elite thing. It's interwoven in the plan, and I really appreciate that, so it doesn't have that stigma of being isolated by itself, this special place. So thank you for that.
So just one comment on the transit system. So I've been involved in the transportation issues in the city for a long time. Was on the transportation board initially, a long time ago, and I think a look at our routes in the fixed route transit system they've been there since 15, 20 years without really much change, and I think that's something that's really ripe for optimization, especially with respect to how it ties into, and this was a comment that I had made early on with respect to the micromobility, is how do all those things work better together? That they're kind of a little bit separate now, and I think that's something focusing in the future is to optimize so that you use the right tool for the right job. And I think our fixed route transit system is long overdue for.
Well, that was the argument on the for free transit. It's like what damage is this going to do? I mean, people don't ride it anyway, so what are we really losing for money? And it will expose these routes and see, people can identify and. But
I fully supported the idea, but anyway.
Okay, thank you.
So we've got a little bit over 20 minutes. Sorry, and then two people haven't had a chance to speak yet. So Sheila said she's saving her comments and she's on to getting on a plane. Alderman Neal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I've had a lot of my questions answered, which was why I was kind of sitting back and waiting, because sometimes people are much more eloquent in asking them than I was able to form. But I do have a question, and I will say that I shamefully admit that I haven't read the previous comp plan page for page as much as I've done this one. And I want to just, a lot of the negative comments that I've heard from constituents is that what a big change this is. And I'm just asking you if you could put the two documents together, because I'm sure that you've studied them. Are there things in the previous comp plan that you've moved forward because they weren't completed or they weren't really brought forward? We didn't really touch upon them in a better way? Or are there things that you wish that we had brought forward because we hadn't worked on them? That was kind of a double-edged question.
It's a big question. I would, as the others have mentioned already, I genuinely see this plan as not a major departure from the pattern of the city. We're aiming for incremental changes in a lot of areas. I think where there are major changes because of social and environmental challenges that the city is facing today that were nowhere near as extreme in the last comp plan, whether it's climate change, housing affordability, mobility hasn't changed much. Annapolis today is still, a place where you need to have a car to be successful, really. So to that extent, we do have a lot of very ambitious transportation goals because we just haven't moved the needle on that, frankly. And then, the future land use map, that is a signature exhibit in the comprehensive plan, every comprehensive plan. We went to additional effort to clarify how that is different from a zoning map, because we got a lot of questions about that. But I think that that's one area where you can kind of look at and say, well, in the 2009 plan, sounds crazy, but like none of the environmental areas of the city that aren't parks are identified. It's like you see very little green on that map. And that was a really very deliberate emphasis. There's lots of sort of natural areas in the city that will never be developed, that add value to properties today, that should be interconnected. And so that was a big change. And then we had, the other major change was this idea of having more mixed use land use. We don't, that doesn't mean large developments. I mean, most mixed use projects have a much smaller, more compact footprint than single use buildings. So it's, and we actually added a bunch of examples of what mixed use looks like. But we just found that if you look at commercial areas in the city that were in the future land use map of the last plan, most of those properties could accommodate multiple uses. You know, a couple of apartments above a retail, for example, or an office above retail, or some kind of institutional use. And so that, you know, I think that put into practice is going to lead to, as Alex said, you know, a city where you can get places without driving longer distances, where things are closer to what you need. But I mean, I think those are the significant. We carry on, you know, like there was a lot of emphasis in the 2009 plan on the downtown area and just the emphasis on city dock, which is actually being implemented now. I mean, it was just it was a recommendation in 2009, and now it's actually being implemented. But that's kind of how I'd answer that question. But
yeah, and just to echo a few things about that, again, it's really on how we're treating mixed use areas. That's something that's very that's a bit more unique, is by combining those, making it a little bit more general mixed use rather than, you know, the professional. I mean, I can't even remember all the different zones because they're really specific. Just making it more generically mixed use so that, you know, maybe for 5 years it's an office building, for the next 10 years it's a retail store, and then maybe it goes back to an office, or it allows that to switch around without having to essentially change the laws. But I mean, I have also heard a lot of people think that this is radical because it's going to do away with all the single family zones. I mean, you hear that a lot, and that is just not true.
Right.
And, you know, there were a couple of goals that were changed about suggesting that there be intensification, especially in R1, R2, and those were removed and changed, but, you know, based on some comments. And so if you compare the old land use map and the future land use map, the residential zones are really not really any different. You know, maybe in certain parts where there are a lot of, say, duplexes, you know, downtown, for example, in places they're not legal, the idea would be they're already there, people like them, let's re-legalize them. That doesn't mean every single family neighborhood should allow duplexes. I mean, if I were king for a day, maybe that's what I would do, but I'm not king. So, but it doesn't really, when I say by again, context sensitive, if they're already there, let's allow more of them. If they're not there, don't force it. You know, that kind of thing. So it's really not, it's very incremental in that way. So it's not radical. I think a lot of things people are reacting to that I've heard is just, you know, hyperbole, frankly.
Right, which kind of goes back to a little bit, I think, what Alderman Savage said about the language and the words that are being used. And I think that we could do some more work on making it more, I'm not going to say dumb it down, but, you know, when you're talking a lot of legalese, or you're talking a lot of, somebody said public worksies, I think that it leads to misunderstandings by people. And, as I was reading through, there were a couple of things that I had to read and reread, and I'm like, okay, well, I can see why somebody thinks that we're going to buy up their property and change it into a duplex, because it kind of leads me to, if I'm not sure of the words, of the structure of the words. So that would be, as I'm going through, there's a couple of places where I've highlighted, and I'll send to you, where I think it could be explained a little bit better so that I didn't have to read it 3 times, as somebody that is consciously reading through and trying to understand the concepts. I think Mr. Waldman had something to say to that. No.
I was going to go back to your first question, and I would just say, I'm going to keep it brief.
Yeah, microphone.
There were opportunity areas, remember, in the former plan? So what's been done? Well, the only thing that's really been done is the plan for West Annapolis. Mm-hmm. And that was pushed because everybody said, it's obvious it needs to be simplified, it needs to be brought to date, and the community was involved. So what I'm seeing is that nothing has been done in every other opportunity area that was identified in the former plan, and now is an opportunity for this council.
Yeah, Bob, that's not right.
Well, you know what I mean. Just the big ones have not been done. Some have been done. Bay Village. Right, but the Hillsmere Shopping Center, the Annapolis Seafood intersection, all the way out at Old Solomon's Island, many of them which were identified as having major opportunity and anyway, this is an opportunity. Okay. This is an opportunity for you to shape what's left. Let's put it that way, okay? This is a real opportunity for you to say, wait a minute, what really could go there? And you've got some good people here, and seize the opportunity, because otherwise you'll get stuff that you don't want, because it's going to be constrained by our current zoning.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Alderman Annette. Do you want to actually, Alderman Annette might take over. I have to be somewhere at 5 o'clock. You'll be here for another hour. Before I go, just want to confirm that George Soros had nothing to do with this plan, just for the public out there. All right. Thank you.
And Alderman Arnett, I'm not sure if you can see my hand. I have one question, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
Thank you. It's just to the Alderwoman from Ward 2's point, and I just want clarification. I heard someone say there was no change, in particularly in density to R2 and R4. I thought that was the entire purpose of proposing the density or changes in those zoning codes. No.
Alderman, what was said, just to clarify, is that we need greater diversity of housing types in the city. We had recommendations in the previous draft that were more targeted at specific zones, and we recognize that based on the comments that we got from the community, we have to do more study. This comprehensive plan is not a zoning rewrite for the city. That has to come after we adopt this plan, and we have to do a more focused study on specific zones and specific parts of the city that could support these different housing types. So that was kind of the clarification. But if you look at the rewrite of the, specifically, I think it's
the
land
use 3.
Land use goal 3, and I think that is identical to housing goal 1. The emphasis is specifically on the types of households that are being priced out of the city today, the missing middle housing demographic, and how we can better support that demographic. So but we kind of took out some of the specifics that were in the previous draft because, frankly, we just need to do some more discussion with the community. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so would that just imply that you would rather, again, I'm speaking in directly to Tyler Avenue, an area that's, it's R2 and B1, B2 right now, and I think at the top, but has potential for revenue growth in that area. Is that something then that you're suggesting that as policymakers, we tweak individually through a trial, or I just want clarification, and that's it. Thank you.
That's a great question. Yeah. Let me say something real quick. So we identified that intersection, Tyler and Forest Drive, which I think is what you're referring to. I mean, that's one of the, I think we call them infill, large infill sites, and that's multiple properties, as you noted. We want to do a plan for that area within the city and not necessarily wait for a developer to come along. And we want to understand what the options are there, what the opportunity is. And, I should acknowledge, I mean, the Housing Authority is going to be redeveloping the Robinwood community. And so we're actually going to be working with them to understand what the opportunity is there to advance their housing goals. And also with the frontage along Forest Drive, there's a huge opportunity to improve that area. So,
yes, what I was going to say is if you pair that area, I think in the plan, it's of those identified areas, it's number 10, with something like the land use recommended action 3.2 of explore using zoning incentives and or regulations to spur construction of housing types that offer more home ownership opportunities for workforce housing, that kind of thing. Or 3.1 that incremental adjustments to the city's residential zones to allow more diversity of housing types. Those kinds of things could be done in those areas to have the end result that you're talking about. But the specifics of those policies are, frankly, up for you guys to hash out, through the zoning change process that comes downstream.
Okay. So, like Mr. Waldman, I just came here to listen, so I'll accept a motion to adjourn. Not. You know me too well. So, earlier this week, I had the opportunity to steal 3 hours of the planning director's time, and we had a very good conversation. And I noticed that one of the things that we talked about came up tonight in his remarks. I used saltier and listed man's terms for it, but he characterized it as first do no harm. And I think that's right. I think we would all agree to, I think, a large degree that we really have a good thing here in Annapolis, and we want to continue to have a good thing. That doesn't mean that we can't make it better. So, Bob, I did listen, and I really appreciated all of the summary remarks that everyone made, particularly you, Alex, in the opening remarks, although I noticed that while Bob was only going to be here to listen, I have more bullet points in his listening comments than I do for yours, Alex, so. But anyway, here's some of the things that I heard, and I think they really do speak to the issues that I'm grappling with, and I think we need to grapple with as we proceed here with the council. And one of the very first things that I heard is this assumption that we need to grow. And I think that one of the things that I said to Chris was, what if the council comes to you with a policy that we've decided that Annapolis is too dense? And I do think I detected a little bit of what, or that we're just fine the way we are. We should have no growth. The reason I raise this is I think those are testable hypotheses. I raised with Planning Director John Arison years ago, what if we didn't have any more growth in Annapolis? And he said the city would die. Well, we really haven't had much growth in Annapolis, and the city really hasn't died. So this growth assumption leads me to some questions about why we want to grow. And I think that that leads this policymaking body to some fairly profound questions about what our job is as stewards of the city and policymakers. And I think about this a lot because I do think as human beings, we have some social obligations to other human beings. And part of that is to help each other. And I think there are some minimum threshold levels of help that everyone deserves. I think they need adequate subsistence, food, probably a little bit more than adequate. I think they need good quality. I think they need clothing, shelter, education, healthcare, transportation. But I don't know, and this is one of the things I'd really like to get to when we do our strategic plan discussion, is what are those threshold levels? So we want to make sure nobody falls below. And then further, in a reinventing government kind of sense, what is the city's role or obligation in satisfying and making sure that there's a safety net and people don't fall through those threshold levels? And I find that a very vexing topic, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. And I'll leave it at that, but I am going to be writing up questions and making observations about the plan and how we address that. The next thing I heard, and I was underlining these when they were being made, yes, it was from Bob about policies, and that is really the interface between the planning staff and the planning commission and this body. We are the policymakers. And I think there's a lot of implicit policies in the plan and even some things that are fairly explicit. But like Alderman Savage, I would really like to see a listing. That is in the Rockville plan, and it was somewhat, to some degree, in the 2009 city plan. But our first and foremost obligation is to work on the policies that this plan is setting forth for the city. That's our responsibility. I think that's our power. So I'm looking for that kind of outline, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something that goes into the planning document, but it does speak to how we grapple with this plan now that it's been given to us. How do we live up to our responsibilities? How do we answer to our constituents? And I'll get to some of the discussion about we're not getting rid of single-family zoning, and that is a real specter that is out there. And I think that it is where the rubber meets the road there, and it's our responsibility to get that firmly in place in our minds, but then to communicate it to our constituents. So some of these are kind of in random order next, but I think there's some real taxonomy problems with the comprehensive plan and the way we talk about it. And missing middle is my favorite pet peeve because it seems to be used in another number of different ways. It seems to be used as an architectural form, particularly when we're talking about form-based zoning, but it's not single-family or townhouse. It's bigger than that, but it's not high-rise apartments. That's one way it's used, but it's also seemingly used to define income categories or needs of people in various income categories. And I'm grappling with trying to find a way to sort that out. That's a real problem for me doing it, to come to grips with this plan and how we might improve the plan and therefore the direction we're going. Form-based zoning, I watched with great interest the February 16th, 23 Planning Commission meeting where Mr. Lashinsky laid out form-based zoning. And then I watched the reaction of the Planning Commission. And I think I heard two things. One, well, first of all, I heard this is really great. I think I remember Diane Butler really saying, wow, this is really cool, Bob. You said, when can we get going on this? We got to make this happen. But then you said, well, this is really complicated, the presentation that you made, Eric, which was several pages long and had lots of examples. And we really shouldn't put much of that in the plan. It's complicated and it's controversial. If we're really intent on going there, I really need to know what form-based zoning is. And I was struck by a comment that you made, Eric. I forget which example, which city you were showing, but you said down in the dust, there's a lot of Euclidean zoning kinds of definition in the form-based zoning. I found that very reassuring because the thing about Euclidean zoning that I feel, and I may just be projecting my residents, is, yeah, it may be very strict and confining, but you know what the rules are. And you don't have to worry about what's being parked next to you. And in that regard, I've been watching closely the Minneapolis experiment here. And I think we need to be looking at other places around the country who are ahead of us on this. Two things that are noteworthy to me out of Minneapolis is it's held rental increases to 1% per annum. It means really held down the rental costs. It's also virtually impossible to sell your single-family home. And I haven't gotten into the detail. I've only heard anecdotal information because who wants to buy when you don't know what's going to be parked on the lot next to you? My sister has a friend who has a $600,000 home in Minneapolis that's been on the market for 2 years. They can't get a buyer. Now, maybe it's a lousy home, I don't know. But I think there's a lot of unintended consequences or things that we haven't looked at, and that takes me back to Chris's comment about first do no harm. And let's not ruin a good thing until we're really sure we know where we're going. In another Planning Commission meeting, and I'm having a hard time tracking through the YouTube, but it was a dialogue, I think, between Eric and Alex and Teresa Pico about, and I think it was related to form-based zoning, and it was something to the effect, and I will get the exact quote, the citizens won't like it, but it's the right thing to do. And that that is a problem, and I will find the Planning Commission meeting. So I really think that transparency is of paramount here. The next thing that I wanted to speak to was the very, very well-received presentation by Mr. Jakubiak before the Eastport Civic Association, and the assurance that the plan is really not thinking too much about Ward 8. It's built environment. There's not much more other than this shopping center you can do. I hope we are going to do something about the fact that it's a food desert, and particularly as the C&I program goes forward, we really are going to have to address that. But I would submit to you that more density will affect Eastport. It will affect the entire city. And I invite you to come to Eastport at any time where there is an accident on Forest Drive and see what it does to mobility going around on the peninsula in Eastport. So more density does have impacts for the city, even if that density isn't showing up in your neighborhood. Getting back to this notion of let's look at planning and the unintended consequences, I bought in Columbia, Maryland in May of 1969. It was wonderful. It was romantic. It was Vermont's small town. Everyone was going to live and work and shop and pray and play in Columbia. And Columbia is a bedroom community. Everybody in the morning leaves Columbia, goes DC, goes to Baltimore, goes to Fort Meade. And downtown Columbia, in my view, and this is my view, which used to be really very romantic and low scale, is hideous with high-rise condominiums and apartments. And my friends who still live there say, you really have to be careful when you want to go for a ride in Columbia because the traffic is terrible. And I've heard the same things about Reston. So as we plan to make Annapolis more dense and better, we need to be sure that we're not having those things happen to us here. The other thing that Chris and I were talking about, when you look in the comp plan in the section on housing, the housing goals as presented are really quite modest. I think it's 700 new units over 20 years. I mean, that's hardly much growth, and there were the 4 growth rate paths that the plan shows going this way from your perspective. We're not deviating from that very much at all. However, Teresa Wellman has submitted 2 years ago now to HUD the official city response that says we're short 2 years ago 3,000 affordable housing units. Now, I'm trying to figure out how you square those first 2 numbers in the first place, but secondly, when you change to form-based zoning and you collapse some of the zoning codes, 700 units may be your target, but that's not the guarantee of where you're going to end up. I don't think if James Rouse were around and took a look at Columbia or Reston or even what's the complex in downtown Baltimore, the Harbor Place, I don't think he would. I think he would be surprised how it turned out. And also I think he would be very disappointed about Harbor Place because it's turned down, it's gone away. And I think that some of these planning concepts are very temporal. And so we need to be sure that when we're doing this planning for the future, that we really are being long-lasting, long-lived in our planning. Another interesting thing in the comp plan, and I really did appreciate Alderman Savage's comments about making the implementation steps much, much simpler, but I also think we need to, if there are actual steps to implement, we need to move from aspiration to actionability. So like one of the big features of this plan is equity in housing. And when you go to the housing thing and the plan for equity is make sure housing in Annapolis is equitable. That's an aspiration. That's not an implementation step. Tell me the 3, 4, 7 things we have to do to make it equitable. And some of them, I think, get back to this very issue of affordable housing. Affordable housing, to my mind, can only happen in one of 2 ways. We either incent the developers to build the housing like the Willows, where they're going to be getting a lesser return, and so they get tax subsidies or whatever, or we're going to have to supplement the income of the people that can't afford housing. And in fact, to me, I think affordable housing is much a real wage issue as it is a housing issue. It's a ratio. Cost of housing, ability to afford that housing. And I think both sides of that ratio need to be looked at. And I will be writing up some of these comments. So here's another dilemma that I'm experiencing right now in Ward 8. The plan calls for, in the mobility section, complete streets. Makes perfect sense to me. I'd like to see complete streets also include undergrounding of utilities. But in Ward 8, with the BG&E and water main, we were promised as sort of the plum, oh, you're going to endure this whole thing with the streets being torn up, but when we come back in, we're going to give you complete streets. Sidewalk all the way through to sidewalks. Now, Public Works is saying, no, we're just going to triage the sidewalks and curbs that need repair where they need repair, and we're going to pave over the street. And when I asked a particular staff member in bicycle lanes, no, that's we don't have the money to do that. So I think that we not only do we need to get this into the plan and into the implementation, but we need to get it into the heads of our staff that when we're planning for complete streets and promising complete streets, we really need to give complete streets. And I think that that's going to be where we overlay the implementation steps in this plan with the performance measures that the city currently has in place, which there are very few measures in our performance measures, but I think this is an ideal opportunity to match the city's strategic plan with the strategic comprehensive plan and the strategic performance measures. And I would really love to see somebody take that overlay of the implementation steps to the department's current performance measures. I think we're going to make great advances in both places when we do that, and I think that's a very exciting aspect of this plan. By the way, I don't have very many more pages left for people who are starting to get antsy. I do really recommend that we get, I was going to recommend Sheila, but she's not on, so I can't tease her, a professional writer to look at the plan. The guts is there, all of the things that are in there, but to Karma's point, it could be a lot simpler, a lot more direct. And this is not to denigrate. I respect the incredible level of effort that has gone into this plan. And I respect that it's so much thicker than the two previous plans because it is more comprehensive. And it is touching on more topics, and it should. And I'm one of the ones that is guilty of, what is it, consonant dissonance? Cognizant dissonance, because every time I looked at the plan, I wanted more, but was complaining it's too hefty. So guilty, you got me, but I do think that a cleanup, and I'd certainly be willing to put this in the budget for doing this. So we're going to need time, at least some of us are going to need the time after we sort of settle out how we grapple between interacting with you and us, to meet with our constituents, to talk to them about the comp plan in each of our wards. And I can guarantee you that there are very, very few people in my ward that are even aware that there's a comp plan. Even fewer have read it. I am worried that I can count on two hands the number of people who've read the comp plan in my ward, and most of them are on the Eastport Civic Association board. We can't have that, because what's going to happen to us is we're going to pass the wonderful comp plan, and then we're going to have people coming up to us saying, I didn't want that. Who agreed to that? So we are going to be your emissaries to carrying this comp plan message to our constituents, and we will need some time to perfect that message. But that's where we address the specter of we're getting rid of all single-family housing, single-family zoning. And that's our job. That's on us. That's not your job. So we are going to need that time to do that. I think we need to talk more about implementation tools. I talked about tax incentives and income subsidies and those sorts of things. But I think that we really need to be more specific in action steps as opposed to aspirational steps about how we accomplish some of these densities. we're going to have to be more specific. I mean, I certainly get the full inkling that when we're getting rid of commercial zones and making them all mixed zones, that's where the density is largely going to go. And it speaks to whoever said it earlier about being along transit lines, makes great sense. We are going to have to talk about how we make transit, traffic, and bicycling and walking all safe. So those are some things that I think need more development. One of the overall reactions that I'm getting from those few people that are reacting to the comp plan is that it wants to convert our small town into a city. And I think there's a lot of people that do not want to become a city. They like being a small town. They like low density. They like low scale. And I would postulate that that's easily 80% of my constituents, easily. And yeah, well, we can shrug our shoulders and say, that's too bad, but they do vote for us, so we feel it a little more closely. And they also do pay taxes, which they are more than ready to complain about. So my last point, geez, this is really brief for me. I'm sorry, I can go on more, but I really do want to figure out, and Eric, Alex, you and I talked about it before the meeting, how do we interact with you, and more importantly, with each other? Right now, I think the sense is that we'll do this through the council committees, but I was starting to take a look at what the council committees cover, and I don't think our committees cover all the aspects of the comp plan, but even so, that's 3 of us. Chris, you and I talked about this. If you come, or you probably, poor Eric, come to every one of our committee meetings for as many meetings as it takes each of us, and we go from environmental matters to rules, and rules says, no, that's not what we want. I really suggested that we can have those committee meetings, and probably should, those council committee meetings, but I think we need to have more committees of the council as a whole, where these ideas are shared, and Karma gets to hear about what wackamany things Arnett is proposing and saying, that doesn't work for my ward. So if we really are going to put in the due diligence and not just give lip service to this comp plan, we are really going to have to figure out a way that we can communicate. I have started with the action plan. Thank you for doing that. And it really does make it easy, and it does make it easy to say, oh yeah, I need to go to chapter 4 of the big plan. So that's a huge improvement in the resource. But I've concluded that I need to start backwards. I want to start from the implementation steps and move back into the plan. And then I also want to start at the front and go from the definitions to move into the plans, because I have some real questions about some of the definitions as well. So as I said to Chris, I will get you in a second, when we were meeting, and I don't think he'll ever meet with me again without security present, but I feel like I'm grappling with a black hole. I really want to get in there, but I don't want to be sucked into it. And this is really daunting stuff if we're taking it seriously, and I think we should, and I think many of us, all of us, hope are. It's a tough one. I'll get to you, Brooks, but first, Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to comment on next steps, but before I do, just real quick on, because I didn't get into too much about policy, but just one policy point based on what I've heard as far as from a number of people. And I think as far as, the perception about the concerns of density, the perception that, we want to get rid of whatever single family zoning, I think we need to step back and look at where that concern is coming from, right? That's coming from people being concerned about the potential impacts of that, right? It's often, again, I'll say it's often due to traffic concerns, It could have to do with school impacts. It could have to do with, and it goes back to the infrastructure is what I'm getting at. That's the kind of point I just want to plant as far as one of my final points. Because again, on our trip to Netherlands, I remember I asked them specifically, I was like, well, did you just build the housing and everything worked out? And they said, no, you got to learn from us, please build the infrastructure first. So now they do, like kind of Bob's point, they build the cycle paths, they build the train, tram lines, and developers come in, they want to put all the dense affordable housing in there. And Bob mentioned, I think the transit lines, and we're seeing in New Carrollton. New Carrollton's had an incredible change over the past, even 10 years, really. And that's where it makes, because they have the infrastructure, it makes sense. Here, I think, so my point is, I think, rather than just say, oh, well, I don't know, I don't want to dismiss people's concerns. I think the point is, if we can work that more coherently, clear in the plan as far as the infrastructure plan. And I know we do have it spread out as far as cycling infrastructure, and I think some stuff in there about pedestrian improvements, but I think it could help allay the public's concerns if we could maybe draw more focus on, well, here's how we're going to solve some of those infrastructure issues, put more emphasis on that. Because I feel like my perception from reading the plan is a lot of emphasis is placed on just increasing density, when I think that's why people are concerned then. So if we try to even it out, I think that could help. As far as, and I have a lot of comments about as far as taking buses and things like that. I think it's only part of people aren't going to take them unless they're faster and easier than taking a car. Like today, I parked actually in Eastport because I was driving over. I was too late. I wanted to bike, but I was like, oh, I don't want to drive downtown because it's St. Mary's. So I parked in the shopping center, took a bird because I couldn't get a bird near my house today. And took a bird in, and it was definitely faster than driving. But I did that because it'd be faster. But in any case, as far as next steps, maybe we need to talk a bit as a group as far as just what policies we may want to dig into or aspects of this we want to dig into and go from there. Because I'm guessing with some of the environmental stuff, we could probably just deal with that committee. I don't know how much, if the whole council wants to necessarily deal with all that. But I think there's some aspects that we could all benefit from. One would be digging in perhaps on form-based zoning, because I also don't have a firm grasp of what that is. And I think the way my mind works, and maybe I could just do this separately with you, but it might help everybody, is walk through, like, what does it mean? Let's go through the process currently. If somebody wants to come in and develop, how to work with our current zone, Euclidean zoning, and how would it work if somebody wanted to come in and do it under form-based? At least for me, because again, that's why when we went overseas and I saw it happen, experienced it, it clicked with me. And something like that might help for me, because right now I don't understand. I'm like, well, how would form-based zoning prevent?
There are a lot of people that can come.
Oh, good.
That can come give talks. I know we've had a few in the past. When Dr. Nash was here, we had a couple, but that certainly people are on to do that.
As long as we're interrupting, can I take some of your... I really like the idea of doing it as a whole. Everybody hears the same thing at the same time. It's not separate. Oh, God, these guys. Aren't I loud enough? Do I need to repeat myself? Yes. I like the idea of meeting as a committee, a council as a whole. Everybody hears the same thing at the same time. You can hear what each other has to say and what your concerns are. I think it's probably a more efficient use of time than breaking it, atomizing it up into these committees. Yeah, it's easier done than us going serially.
Well, and I think one point, just quick, I think that could work. And I think what maybe some of us, I'm thinking for myself, and I think anybody else who may have this situation, but if we have specific comments, I would like to sit down with, I don't know, whoever you guys think would be appropriate, and go through so I can get to a place of comfort and resolve with some of these. And then we can save the big issues for the committee as a whole, council as a whole.
So I think one of the things we can do, or I will be willing to do at least, is sort of write up some of my ideas. I'm going to focus my comments on the action plan, because it's shorter and it does have all the guts. And I'm going to make comments page by page. and I'd be more than happy to share it with my colleagues and, of course, with you. And I think we need to get a sense of where each other are. I'm disappointed we didn't get to hear from Sheila today because even though we're best of friends, I think we have very different views on certain things. And, I want to know where my longtime colleague is coming from. We have to get to 5 votes at a minimum. I hope we get to more than that to approve this plan. And I think that sharing these ideas with each other is a way to get to the consensus or common ground at least. So anyway, Alderman Schoenmeyer was next.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I don't want to be disrespectful, but I have a community meeting I have to get to that starts in about half an hour. I don't want to cut this short. I can watch the video, and you're in good hands. I do have to leave. I just wanted to apologize.
That's why we pay you. That's why we pay you the big bucks.
It's in Ward 6. So.
Alderman Schoenmeyer is next. I see Dewan is back with us. I don't know, but I think there's some hands over here also. Brooks?
So I do want to piggyback off some things that were brought up with infrastructure costs and how infill will actually help us address a lot of these. The Urban 3 study that we have the revenue acre information on currently. I spoke with our point of contact at Urban 3 actually right before coming to this, and he says our expenditure data is coming soon.
Good.
They just have to get like 1 or 2 more things from some department heads. And that is going to show, though, a lot of our land use isn't paying for itself with the infrastructure, and that our choices are either to increase taxes to it, cut those services or infrastructure being provided to it, or to just be smarter about land use. Those are our 3 areas. Same thing with our transit, the chicken or the egg thing. A lot of our zoning code doesn't actually allow us to have a transportation system that can function effectively. You do need minimum densities for certain things. And I'm not saying like throw a 20-story tower up on like the middle of a field, but you do need about 16 units per acre to get a bus going every 15 minutes, which is pretty much the thing that gets people in public transit versus driving. And I do also want to piggyback on the comment of do no harm. I always get very frustrated when people go, oh, well, if we change, that'll cause harm, or, oh, what about the quality of life? The current system we have set up has about 50% of our renters cost burdened and about 25% of our homeowners are cost burdened. Not changing it hurts their quality of life too. Not changing it does a lot of harm to them. I know it's easy to always focus on the loudest voices who usually are doing okay in the grand scheme of things. Excuse me?
We were trying to figure out if we were getting cut off.
Oh.
TV people, but we're not.
Oh, well, Julian's not cutting me off. That's good. I know it's easy to focus on people who are doing okay to listen to those loud voices, but a lot of people who are struggling to get by and will benefit from these changes don't have time to come to a council meeting to listen to a zoning discussion. But they want us to do something about this housing crisis. They want us to do something about bad transportation infrastructure. And so I appreciate wanting to be careful and not wanting to build incredibly out of scale in like the middle of certain neighborhoods. Like that all makes sense, but there does need to be some very serious changes made if we're going to go forward in the promises that this city makes to people. I have one specific question that's not related to...
Can we stay on this last topic, though, please, for a second?
All right.
Because that's why I brought up this notion of our, I call it moral responsibility to our fellow human beings and making sure that nobody falls through the safety net and subsistence level. But I also think we need to define what the city's role is in that. As you know, Alderman Gay and I are thinking about a universal income program, and that addresses the income side of the affordable housing thing. But I don't think we've really ever, as a council, addressed first order fundamental principles about what our obligations are and what is a city duty and what is the duty of another higher level entity or state or federal. And I think we really have to get that framed up before we can figure out what it is we're supposed to do here versus being done. I had a brief conversation with Stuart Pittman, and we were talking about affordable housing. He said, "You're too small to make any difference in the affordable housing." Well, that's an interesting observation. I don't know what the empirical information is on that, but in any event, I just wanted to respond. There are a lot of people that are expressing these concerns. It's not just the usual loud voices. So I do think we need to take care. You wanted to raise another point because I have two other.
It's very hyper-specific, so I'll catch them offline.
Okay. So Alderwoman Pendle Charles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, let me comment on what you said, just indicate about what County Executive Pittman said. When he came to our ribbon cutting for town courts almost 2 years ago, he was amazed and said he goes to these types of events all over the county all the time. But this was something that was really, really the template that we should follow. So I just want to mention that. The other thing I want to mention, Alderman Schandemeyer talking about how we should focus on those who are the least of us, as the Bible says. And I just want to give you some historical, about 30 years ago when there was redistricting and there was the edict that we would have 3 African Americans on this council. And that was one of the things that was pushed and pushed. And what you see today is Ward 3, Ward 4, and Ward 6 as a result of that. So part of our duty as African American legislators, because this is the mandate that was set to us about 30 years ago, and my husband served on the redistricting committee at that time, is we are to focus on those that look like us, for lack of a better term. A lot of what my constituents, and I'll go to 3, 4, and 6, are looking at is gentrification, and we don't need to go into a long soliloquy about that, but I mentioned this to the director, that when you see renditions of form-based zones, code, whatever you want to call it, it looks white, very white. I have not seen a rendition of form-based codes or zoning that look like me. And that's why I'm saying that term itself is visually, I won't say deceptive, maybe it is, I don't know. But I've seen enough of them since 2016, and Mr. Waldman remembers when we were at Mount Olive for 3 days on that charrette. When we talked about Upper West Street, Mr. Walden, you remember?
I talked about the what?
The charrette that we had at Mount Olive back in 2016. The charrette, the community charrette that we talked about, and we had 3 days of talking about Upper West Street and zoning and all of that. You were very involved in that. Everything I've seen since then doesn't look like me. And so the issue of gentrification is alive and well, and I'll say that. The last thing I want to say is concerning those who travel to the Netherlands, and I just mentioned it to my colleagues over here. One thing I think, and it just dawned on me, that we have to look at the form of government overall that they have. Democracy, and I'm not saying they aren't one, is based on freedoms. It's not necessarily based on if we build it, they will come. It is based on a set of freedoms that we have all learned to love in this country beyond many other democracies or forms of government. So when we look at, I think, when we start to look at zoning and what we do here, I think we also have to look at the form of government that we've all grown up with and that we've all lived with, that has its flaws, but we do, many of us say, this is the best country in the world. So I think when we start looking at other countries, I think we need to look at the form of government that we have learned to live with and admire and aspire versus others. And that's just kind of a generalization, I want to say. So thank you all again so very much.
Alderman O'Neill? No? Anyone? Oh my gosh, Gavin's going to be disappointed. He could have stayed.
Mr. Chair,
Duan.
thank you. Just very quick.
Yeah.
Very quickly, I'm not sure if you all have decided for committees or for another work session, but I think it's important that whatever we do, Teresa Wellman and Denise Ruffin be a part of the conversation, because we all have interest in housing, and we need those experts at the table to, answer our questions and ensure that we are moving in the right direction. I'm pleased to hear that everybody is thinking with their moral compass, as my colleague from Ward 1 has often called it, using your moral compass when legislating, because the housing is the key component. The transportation is the key component to a lot of the disparities that we have within the city. And so I'm excited about the plan. There are small points that I pointed out, but I am excited about the next conversation as well, and appreciate you all for working on it.
Thank you for that. If there's no further comment, we are adjourned.
No, are you meeting again?
Yeah, I think we need to we need to have another meeting like this of the whole, but I think we need to figure out when people are going to be ready for that. I know Alderman Savage and I would like to have a meeting of the environmental matters specifically, but I would encourage all of us to write up their thoughts and share them with each other. I'm of a hope, and I actually do feel we're really not that far apart from each other. It may be a matter of degree or emphasis, but I don't think anybody would argue we can do better on transit. We can do better on mobility writ large. We can do better on a lot of things, and a lot of that is in that document. So, but I think I agree with you. Of course, that's what Chris and I were talking about. How do we do this? So poor Eric, I mean, my God, that guy, I'm surprised he's still got any dark hair left. But in any event, yeah, I think we definitely need to have one or two more meetings of the whole, but we probably need to have some subset and maybe even some sharing back and forth with the planning staff and the planning commission.
So a month, 3 weeks?
I'd like to say 3 weeks myself, but
Guess we
we'll
have to
to
check
figure
with the
out how we
clerk.
can schedule. Pardon?
With the schedule of the clerk's office.
One of the reasons for doing it sooner rather than later is on April 8th, we get the city budget dumped on us.
Yeah.
So this should really be the hot iron. So I will discuss this with the city manager and the mayor, but and then we'll send something out to all of our colleagues to see when they're ready. Yes, Alderwoman Tierney.
I just want to throw it back at you as far as this 90-day thing. Can you offer us some kind of structure on when you need comments so that you can respond? There's going to be some, it sounds like there's going to be some redoing, right? So, I'm trying to back into that.
Sure. It's a good question. Not everything that you would suggest by way of changes or direct by way of changes would need to be remanded back to the Planning Commission. The document has been completed from the Planning Commission standpoint.
And transmitted.
If there's something substantive of major import that you're changing, then you would meet and you would convene, you'd hold a public hearing, and you would say, we are remanding this back to the Planning Commission to do over or to fix. And they would hold a public hearing, and then they would fix it, send it back, or they would say, what we did was good enough, and they'd send it back to you, whatever. That's their prerogative as the Planning Commission. They could do that. But ultimately, it's the Planning Commission's plan. They provided a plan that seems like you have general agreement with so far. So I don't see anything so far that requires a substantive change or formal remand. That may not be the case. I mean, we may go into it and find out that we really do need to take something in a different direction. But right now, I have a list of comments. Eric does too. And we'll package them together and we'll staff this committee as a whole until you're ready to move to approval or decide to remand And then if it does go back to the planning commission, then it'll be up to Alex and Bob to work with their members of the planning commission to consider your comments. And
Yeah, I just didn't want to walk into a situation, so.
so far, so good. This has been, by the way, an excellent discussion. Fantastic. I'm really honored to be part of it. Yeah. Great comments.
Adjourn.
Oh, yeah. Did we adjourn? Well, I think we're adjourned.
Can you communicate to the administration that we'd like to have another meeting of the whole fairly soon? And then colleagues, if you can let us, each other know when you feel comfortable with having.
Go to the clerk's office to get a date.
Do what?
Go to the clerk's office to get a date.
Well, I'm asking Vicky to coordinate that for us, so anyway, all
Mr.
right.
Chairman, motion to adjourn?
So moved, or second, I don't even think we have to have a motion for a work
right,
session.
bye.
We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughts and hard work.